France, 1944. A young woman sits strapped to a chair in a Gestapo interrogation room. Her body is covered in bruises. Her fingernails have been torn out. Electric shocks have left burn marks on her skin. The Nazi officer leans in close. "Tell us about your network," he demands. "Give us the names." She looks him dead in the eye and says nothing, not a word, not a name, not a location. The officer nods to his assistant. The torture continues. This goes on for hours, days, weeks. Trained soldiers, hardened men who'd seen combat, would break under this kind of treatment. Most people gave up everything after the first session, but not her. She never talked, never gave them a single name. And here's the thing that'll tear your heart out. Back in England, she had a 2-year-old daughter waiting for her, a little girl named Tanya who didn't know if her mommy was ever coming home. Her name was Violette Szabo. She was 23 years old. And this is the story of how a young mother became one of the most decorated secret agents of World War II. A woman who walked into hell by choice, knowing she might never walk out. A woman who could have stayed safe at home with her baby, but decided some things were worth dying for. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You've heard stories about the war, you've seen the movies. But let me tell you something, and I want you to really hear this. What Violette Szabo did wasn't some Hollywood fantasy. This wasn't a beautiful actress pretending to be brave on a movie set. This was a real woman, barely out of her teens, who volunteered for missions that had a 70% fatality rate. 70%. That means 7 out of every 10 people who did what she did never came home. And she knew those odds. She looked at those numbers, kissed her baby daughter goodbye, and got on that plane to France anyway. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started, because understanding who Violette was before the war makes what she did even more remarkable. See, heroes aren't born in interrogation rooms. They're made in the choices they make, long before anyone's watching. Violette Rain Elizabeth Bushell was born on June 26, 1921, in Paris. Her father, Charles Bushell, was a British car dealer. Her mother, Rain, was French. So, right from the start, Violette lived between two worlds. She spoke both English and French fluently, with perfect accents in both languages. That skill, that ability to move seamlessly between cultures, would later save her life more than once. And ultimately, it's what got her recruited into one of the most dangerous organizations in World War II. When Violette was 11 years old, the family moved to London. They settled in Brixton, a working-class neighborhood in South London. Nothing fancy, just regular people trying to get by. Violette grew up like any other kid in the neighborhood. She went to school. She played in the streets. She helped her mother around the house. But there was something different about her, something people noticed even when she was young. She had this fierce independence, this unwillingness to back down from anything. Her brothers would later say that Violette never met a challenge she wouldn't take on. If someone said she couldn't do something, well, that just made her more determined to prove them wrong. She left school at 14. That was normal back then, especially for working-class families. She needed to work to help support the family. She took a job at a department store, Woolworth's on Oxford Street. Can you imagine? This woman who would later parachute behind enemy lines and outsmart Nazi intelligence officers started out selling goods at Woolworth's. Just a regular girl with a regular job, living a regular life in London. But Violette was anything but ordinary. She had this energy, this vitality that people remembered. She loved life. She loved dancing, going to the cinema, spending time with friends. She was beautiful, yeah, but it wasn't just her looks. It was the way she carried herself. Confident, fearless. The kind of woman who walked into a room and everyone noticed. Then 1940 rolled around. Violette was 18 years old, and everything changed. Germany invaded France in May of that year. By June, France had fallen. The country where Violette's mother was born, where Violette herself had been born, was now under Nazi occupation. Paris, the city of her birth, had swastikas hanging from the Eiffel Tower, and Britain stood alone, waiting for an invasion that seemed inevitable. On July 14th, 1940, Bastille Day, there was a parade in London. French soldiers who had escaped the fall of France marched through the streets. These were men of the Free French forces, soldiers who refused to surrender, who had fled to Britain to continue the fight. Violette went to watch the parade. She wanted to see these brave men, these soldiers who hadn't given up. And that's where she met him, Étienne Szabo. Now, let me tell you about Étienne. He was a French Foreign Legion officer, handsome, brave, everything a young woman might dream about. He'd escaped from France after the defeat, made his way to England, and joined Charles de Gaulle's Free French forces. He was a soldier, through and through, the kind of man who knew what duty meant. And when he saw Violette standing in that crowd, beautiful and vibrant and alive, he fell for her immediately. They met on July 14th. They were engaged by August 21st. 5 weeks. That's all it took. Now, you might think that's crazy, that's too fast. But here's the thing you've got to understand about wartime. You didn't have time. Every day could be your last. Every goodbye could be forever. So when you found something real, something worth holding on to, you grabbed it with both hands and didn't let go. Violette and Étienne understood that. They didn't waste time. They couldn't afford to. They got married on August 21st, 1940, at Aldershot Registry Office. Violette was 19 years old. Étienne was 30. And for a brief, shining moment, they were happy, truly happy. They spent what time they could together, stealing moments between Étienne's military duties. And on June 8th, 1942, their daughter Tanya was born. A beautiful baby girl, the product of their love, their hope for the future. But the war doesn't care about happiness. It doesn't care about love or babies or futures. The war just takes and takes and takes. In October 1942, Étienne was deployed to North Africa with the Free French forces. He was sent to fight in the Desert Campaign, pushing back against Rommel's Afrika Korps. Before he left, he held his baby daughter. He kissed his wife. He promised he'd come home. It's the promise every soldier makes, knowing they might not be able to keep it. He didn't come home. Étienne Szabo was killed in action at the Battle of El Alamein on October 24, 1942. He was shot in the chest during a battle at Bir Hakeim. He died doing his duty, fighting for a free France. He never saw his daughter grow up. He never got to watch her take her first steps or hear her say her first words. Violette was 21 years old, a widow with a baby daughter. Can you imagine that? You're barely into your 20s, you've got this beautiful child, and the man you love, the father of your baby, is suddenly gone, just gone. And there's nothing you can do about it, nothing you can change. He's dead, and you're alive, and you've got to figure out how to keep going. Some people would have broken, would have retreated into grief and never come out. But not Violette. Grief didn't break her. It forged her into something harder, something sharper. Her husband had died fighting the Nazis. Now she was going to finish what he started. If she couldn't have him back, she could at least make sure his death meant something. She could make the Germans pay for every drop of French blood they'd spilled. She went to work at an aircraft factory. It was war work, important work, building the planes that would bomb Germany. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't personal enough. She wanted to hurt them directly. She wanted to look the enemy in the eye and make them suffer the way she was suffering. And then, in the summer of 1943, opportunity came knocking. A neighbor noticed that Violette spoke fluent French. This neighbor, it turned out, had connections, and Violette found herself being invited for a very unusual interview. The organization was called the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. And what they did was send agents into occupied Europe to sabotage the Nazi war machine from the inside. Now, before we go any further, let me tell you what the SOE actually was, because this wasn't your regular military operation. This was something new, something that the British had never really done before. Winston Churchill created the SOE in July 1940 with one simple instruction: set Europe ablaze. He wanted agents who could go into Nazi-occupied territory and cause chaos, blow up railways, sabotage factories, arm resistance fighters, gather intelligence, and if necessary, kill Germans. The SOE recruited a special kind of person. They needed people who could speak foreign languages fluently, who could blend in, who could lie convincingly, who could kill if they had to. And they needed people who understood that if they were caught, Britain would deny all knowledge of them. There would be no prisoner exchange, no diplomatic intervention. If the Nazis caught you, you were on your own. And what the Nazis did to captured agents, well, let me just say that death would have been a mercy. Most of the agents were men. But the SOE also recruited women. And here's why. A man wandering around occupied France might draw suspicion. Why wasn't he working for the Germans? Why wasn't he in a labor camp? But a woman could move more freely. She could carry messages, smuggle weapons, make contacts without raising as much suspicion. The Germans were sexist. They underestimated women. And the SOE used that prejudice as a weapon. But make no mistake, being a female SOE agent was just as dangerous as being a male one. Maybe more dangerous, because if you were captured, well, the Gestapo didn't care what gender you were. They tortured everyone the same. And women, let's be honest, faced additional horrors that I don't need to spell out for you. You know what I'm talking about. Violette knew all this when she went to her interview. They didn't hide the danger from her. They told her straight out, if you do this, you'll probably die. Most agents didn't survive their first mission, and even if you made it through one mission, eventually your luck would run out. Eventually they'd catch you, and when they did, it would be bad. Very bad. They asked her if she was sure she wanted to volunteer. She looked them in the eye and said yes. Her husband was dead. Someone had to keep fighting. Why not her? So they accepted her. Violette Szabo was recruited into the SOE in October 1943. She was 22 years old. She had a 1-year-old daughter at home. And she'd just volunteered for a job that would almost certainly get her killed. Her family tried to talk her out of it. Her mother begged her not to go. "Think of Tanya," she said. "Your daughter needs her mother." But Violette had made up her mind, and when Violette Szabo made up her mind about something, nothing could change it. Before she could be sent to France, she had to be trained. And the SOE training program wasn't some weekend workshop. This was months of intensive, brutal preparation designed to give agents the skills they'd need to survive behind enemy lines, if they could survive it. They sent her to Scotland first, to a place called Arisaig. Beautiful country, if you've ever been there. Mountains, lochs, forests, remote, private. Perfect for learning how to kill people without anyone noticing. That's where she learned basic fieldcraft, how to move silently, how to observe without being observed, how to hide, how to track, how to survive in the wilderness. They pushed her physically, making her march for miles with heavy packs, testing her endurance, seeing if she'd quit. She didn't quit. She never quit. Then they taught her how to use weapons. Pistols, rifles, submachine guns. The Sten gun was the weapon of choice for SOE agents. British-made, simple, reliable. She learned to strip it down and reassemble it in the dark. She learned to shoot accurately, quickly, instinctively. They taught her that in a firefight, hesitation gets you killed. When you draw your weapon, you shoot to kill. No warnings, no second chances. They taught her hand-to-hand combat, how to disable a man twice her size, how to kill silently with a knife, where to cut, where to stab, how much pressure it takes to crush a windpipe. This wasn't sport fighting. This wasn't martial arts for self-defense. This was murder, plain and simple, efficient, effective murder, and Violette learned it all. But the physical training was only part of it. They also had to train her mind. They taught her how to lie, how to maintain a cover story under interrogation, how to spot a tail, how to shake off surveillance. They taught her codes, how to send encrypted messages, how to recognize other agents without blowing their cover. They taught her how to blow up trains, how to sabotage machinery, how to make bombs from household materials. And then came the really hard part, the interrogation resistance training. They would grab her without warning, throw a bag over her head, drag her to a cell. Then they'd interrogate her for hours, trying to break her cover story. They'd scream at her, threaten her, deprive her of sleep, keep bright lights in her face. They did everything except actually torture her. And the whole time, she had to maintain her false identity, had to stick to her cover story, no matter what they threw at her. Most trainees broke at some point. They'd slip up, give away something that compromised their cover. Violette never broke, not once. Her instructors noted that she had exceptional determination and remarkable composure under pressure. There was one exercise that really showed what kind of person Violette was. They took the trainees on a training jump, teaching them how to parachute. Now, parachuting in 1943 wasn't like parachuting today. The equipment was primitive. The training was minimal. People got hurt all the time. Broken bones, torn ligaments, concussions. It was dangerous, especially at night, which is when agents had to jump. You couldn't see where you were landing. You just hit the ground and hoped for the best. Violette's parachute didn't deploy properly. She came down hard, twisted her ankle badly. It swelled up like a balloon, turned purple and black. The instructors told her she'd need to take time off, let it heal. She refused. She wrapped it up tight, swallowed the pain, and kept going. She wasn't going to let a sprained ankle stop her. Her instructors were impressed. They wrote in her file, "A very determined personality, has plenty of confidence in herself." By April 1944, her training was complete. She was ready, or as ready as anyone could be for what was coming. The SOE gave her a code name, Louise. Her cover identity was a French woman named Corinne Rain-Leroy, a widow from Paris. She had false papers, a carefully constructed backstory, contacts in France who would help her once she arrived. Everything was in place. Now she just had to survive. They told her she'd be inserted into France to work as a courier for a resistance network called Salesman. Her job was to coordinate between different resistance groups, carry messages, help organize sabotage operations against German targets. The Allies were planning the D-Day invasion. It was scheduled for June, just 2 months away. They needed the French resistance to cause as much chaos as possible when the invasion started. Blow up bridges, cut telephone lines, ambush German reinforcements trying to reach the beaches. Every German soldier delayed by resistance activity was one less German shooting at Allied troops landing in Normandy. Before she left, Violette went to say goodbye to her daughter. Tanya was not quite 2 years old, too young to understand where Mommy was going or why. Violette held her, played with her, memorized every detail of her face. The way she laughed, the way she reached up with those tiny hands. She didn't know if she'd ever see her daughter again. The odds said she wouldn't, but she'd made her choice. Some things were bigger than one person's life. Some things were worth dying for. Freedom was one of them. On April 5th, 1944, Violette Szabo parachuted into France. She landed near Cherbourg in Normandy. The jump was clean this time, no injuries. She gathered up her parachute, buried it, and made contact with her reception committee. They gave her a bicycle and sent her on her way. She was in France, in occupied territory, the place where her mother had been born, where she herself had been born. But now it was enemy territory. Every person she passed could be an informer. Every German she saw could be the one who caught her. She was alone, armed with nothing but a pistol and her wits, and the mission had just begun. Her first job was to make contact with resistance groups in the region, to assess their capabilities, their needs, their readiness for when the invasion came. She cycled from village to village, using her cover as Corinne Leroy, just a young widow trying to get by, visiting family, looking for work. Nobody suspected her. She looked too innocent, too harmless. That was her greatest weapon. She met with resistance leaders, passed messages between groups that couldn't communicate directly without risking exposure. She helped coordinate supply drops, made sure that when the RAF dropped weapons and explosives by parachute, there were people there to collect them and hide them before the Germans could find them. She assessed targets for sabotage, identified which bridges and railway lines were most important to destroy, and she did all this while surrounded by the enemy. German soldiers were everywhere. Checkpoints on the roads, patrols in the streets, Gestapo agents watching, always watching, looking for anything suspicious. One wrong word, one slip-up, one person who didn't believe her cover story, and it would all be over. But Violette never slipped. She was perfect, cool, calm, professional. She did her job, and she did it well. After 6 weeks, she'd accomplished her mission. She'd assessed the resistance networks, delivered her messages, helped prepare the ground for D-Day. It was time to go home. On the night of April 30th, 1944, a plane came to pick her up from a secret landing strip. She climbed aboard and flew back to England. Mission accomplished. She'd survived her first deployment. Against all odds, she'd made it home alive. They debriefed her in London, asked her hundreds of questions about what she'd seen, who she'd met, what the resistance was capable of. She gave them valuable intelligence, information that would help plan operations for when the invasion came. And then she went home to see her daughter. Tanya was still there, still safe, still perfect. For a few precious days, Violette got to be a mother again, got to pretend that the world was normal, that there wasn't a war, that she wasn't a spy who'd just spent 6 weeks behind enemy lines. But it couldn't last. The war was still going on. The invasion was coming, and the SOE needed her again. In June 1944, just a day after D-Day, they sent her back. This time the mission was even more dangerous. The Germans were in chaos after the invasion, yes, but they were also paranoid, violent, cracking down hard on any suspected resistance activity. They were shooting people on suspicion, torturing anyone they thought might be involved with the underground. It was the worst possible time to be an agent in France, and that's exactly when they sent Violette back. Her new assignment was to work with a resistance network in Limoges, in central France. The network, codenamed Salesman 2, needed help coordinating guerrilla operations against German forces. Her contact was a man named Jacques Dufour, a resistance leader known by his codename Anastasie. She was supposed to help him organize his fighters, coordinate attacks on German supply lines, generally make life hell for the Wehrmacht. Hey, look, I know we're only part-way through this story, and I can see some of you are really engaged with this. If you're finding Violette's story as powerful as I am, could you do me a favor? Hit that subscribe button. Here's why I'm asking, and I'm being straight with you. Channels like this, we survive on viewers like you who care about preserving these stories. Every subscription tells YouTube that this content matters, that these stories of courage and sacrifice deserve to be told. We're not just talking about ancient history here. We're talking about real people who gave everything so we could live free. And if we don't tell their stories, who will? Your subscription, it's not just for me. It's a vote to keep these memories alive. So if you believe that matters, if you think the next generation needs to hear about people like Violette Szabo, click that button. It takes 2 seconds and means the world to this channel. Now, let's get back to France, because things are about to go very, very wrong. On June 10th, 1944, Violette and Jacques Dufour were traveling by car near the village of Salon-la-Tour. They'd been meeting with resistance groups, planning operations. Everything had gone smoothly. They were on their way back when suddenly there was a German roadblock ahead. An SS unit. Waffen-SS, to be specific. These weren't regular Wehrmacht soldiers. These were elite troops, fanatical Nazis, the kind of men who didn't ask questions first, the kind who shot and sorted it out later. The driver tried to turn around, but it was too late. The Germans had seen them. They opened fire. Bullets shattered the car windows. The driver was hit. The car swerved, crashed. Violette, Dufour, and another resistance fighter named Jacques Poirier tumbled out of the vehicle and ran for it. They sprinted toward a nearby wheat field, bullets kicking up dirt all around them. If they could make it to the field, they might be able to lose the Germans in the grain. It was their only chance. They made it to the field and kept running. Behind them, they could hear the Germans organizing, could hear dogs barking. They were being hunted. Dufour and Poirier were ahead of Violette. She was falling behind. That ankle, the one she'd injured during training, had never fully healed. It was slowing her down. She could feel it giving out with every step, pain shooting up her leg. "Keep going," she shouted to the men. "I'll hold them off." And here's where you need to understand something about Violette Szabo. She could have kept running, could have pushed through the pain, maybe made it to cover. But if she did that, the Germans would catch up to all 3 of them. They'd all be captured. They'd all be tortured. They'd all give up names under interrogation, no matter how strong they were. Everyone broke eventually. That's what the Germans were counting on. But if she stopped, if she stayed and fought, maybe she could buy enough time for Dufour and Poirier to escape. 2 experienced resistance leaders versus 1 SOE agent. It was a simple calculation. Her life for theirs. One person's sacrifice so that the network could survive, so that the mission could continue. She didn't hesitate, didn't even pause to think about it. She found cover behind a tree, pulled out her Sten gun, and opened fire on the approaching Germans. The SS. Soldiers hit the ground, took cover, returned fire. And for the next hour, Violette Szabo, a 22-year-old woman with a sprained ankle and a submachine gun, held off an entire SS unit single-handedly. Think about that for a second. One woman, one gun, going up against dozens of elite German soldiers, and she didn't run, didn't surrender. She fought. She fired burst after burst, changing magazines, making every shot count. The Germans tried to flank her. She shifted position, kept them pinned down. They tried to advance. She drove them back. For 1 hour, she kept them at bay. 1 hour that gave Dufour and Poirier time to escape, time to disappear into the countryside, time to live and fight another day. But eventually, the inevitable happened. She ran out of ammunition. The Sten gun clicked empty. She reached for another magazine and found nothing. She was out. Done. Finished. The Germans realized she'd stopped firing. They moved in, cautiously at first, expecting a trap. But there was no trap. There was just Violette, sitting there with an empty gun, waiting for them. They dragged her out of the wheat field, beat her, screamed at her in German. She said nothing, just stared at them with those eyes that never looked away, never showed fear. They searched her, found her false papers identifying her as Corinne Leroy. They didn't believe it for a second. They knew what she was. British agent, spy, terrorist, they called her. She was everything they hated and feared. And now they had her. They took her to Limoges, locked her in a cell. And that's when the interrogations began. The Gestapo wanted names. They wanted to know who she was working with, what she knew, where the other agents were. They needed to roll up the entire network, arrest everyone before they could escape. And Violette was the key to all of it. If they broke her, if they got her to talk, they could destroy the resistance in the entire region. So they questioned her, for hours at a time. Where were you going? Who were you meeting? What are their names? Where do they live? She said nothing. They tried being reasonable. Just tell us, they said. Make it easy on yourself. If you cooperate, we'll go easy on you. You'll be treated as a prisoner of war. You'll survive this. She didn't believe them, didn't say a word, so they stopped being reasonable. They started hurting her. I'm not going to describe in detail what they did. This is brutal enough as it is. But use your imagination. Think about what people are capable of when they want information and they don't care about the suffering they cause. Think about the worst things human beings can do to each other. They did those things to Violette, and she still didn't talk. They burned her with cigarettes. She didn't talk. They beat her until bones broke. She didn't talk. They used electric shocks. She didn't talk. They pulled out her fingernails one by one. Can you imagine that? The pain of having your fingernails ripped out by the roots? She screamed, sure. She cried. She's human. But she didn't talk, didn't give them a single name, not one location, nothing. They kept her in solitary confinement between interrogation sessions. Dark cell, no light, no human contact except when they came to hurt her. Days blurred into weeks. She lost track of time, lost weight. Her body was a mass of bruises and burns and broken things, but her mind stayed strong. Her will never broke. She remembered her training. She remembered who she was and why she was there. She remembered Étienne, her dead husband, and she thought, I will not let you down. I will not betray our cause. No matter what they do to me, I will not break. The Germans couldn't believe it. They'd broken trained soldiers, hardened criminals, people who thought they were tough. Everyone broke eventually. That's what they knew, what their experience taught them. Apply enough pain and anyone will tell you anything you want to know. But not this woman. This young mother, this widow, this girl who looked like she should be at home raising her daughter. She was harder than any of them. She had something they couldn't break, a reason to endure. She was protecting people, protecting the mission, protecting her daughter's future. And that gave her a strength that no amount of torture could overcome. After weeks of interrogation in Limoges, the Germans gave up. They weren't going to break her. So they shipped her to Frayne prison in Paris. That's where they sent prisoners they were done interrogating, prisoners they were going to execute or send to concentration camps. Frayne's was a holding facility, a way station on the road to death. The Gestapo in Paris took one more crack at her, tried a few more times to get her to talk. Same result, nothing. She'd rather die than betray her friends. And die she probably would. But here's something remarkable. Even in Fran, even knowing she was probably going to be executed, Violette never lost hope. Other prisoners later testified that she kept their spirits up, that she sang to them through the walls, that she stayed defiant and strong even when everything seemed hopeless. One prisoner remembered her voice singing "The White Cliffs of Dover" late at night. "There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow, just you wait and see." A promise that they'd make it home, that Britain would win, that all this suffering would mean something. She made friends with other women prisoners. There were other SOE agents there, other women who'd been caught doing the same work she was doing. They whispered to each other through the walls, tapped out messages in code, kept each other sane in that hell. One of those women was Denise Bloch, another SOE agent. Another was Lillian Rolfe. Both of them had been captured, both had been tortured, both had refused to talk. They formed a bond, these three women who'd given everything for the cause. They spent months in Fran. Summer turned to fall. The Allies were pushing across France. Paris was liberated in August 1944. The Germans were losing. Everyone knew it. The prisoners in France could hear the Allied artillery getting closer. They thought they might actually be saved, that the Germans would retreat and leave them behind, that they'd be freed when the Allies arrived. They were so close to freedom they could almost taste it. But the Germans weren't going to leave valuable prisoners behind. In August 1944, Violette, Denise, and Lillian, along with several other women prisoners, were put on a train. Destination? Germany. They were being shipped to concentration camps. One last journey east, toward the heart of darkness. The train journey was a nightmare. They were packed into cattle cars, dozens of women crammed together with no food, no water, no sanitation. It was August, brutally hot. The smell was unbearable. Women were dying, collapsing from heat exhaustion and dehydration. The train would stop, sometimes, and German guards would drag out the bodies of those who'd died and leave them by the tracks. Then the train would start moving again. Violette shared what little water she had, comforted women who were breaking down. Even in hell, she tried to help others. That's who she was. That's who she remained, no matter what they did to her. Other prisoners later testified that Violette's courage kept them going, that her refusal to give up inspired them to keep fighting, to stay alive one more day, one more hour. After days on that train, they arrived at Ravensbrück concentration camp. If you don't know about Ravensbrück, let me tell you. It was a camp specifically for women, political prisoners, resistance fighters, anyone the Nazis considered an enemy. Over 130,000 women passed through Ravensbrück. At least 30,000 died there, executed, worked to death, or just left to die of disease and starvation. Violette, Denise, and Lillian were classified as Nacht- und Nebel prisoners. Night and fog, it translates to. It was a special designation for people the Nazis wanted to make disappear. No trial, no record, no notification to their families. They'd just vanish into the darkness and never be seen again. The Nazis' way of making sure that troublesome prisoners couldn't become martyrs. If nobody knew they were dead, nobody could honor their sacrifice. The conditions at Ravensbrück were beyond description. Overcrowded barracks crawling with lice, starvation rations, brutal labor details, disease everywhere, typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery. The SS guards were monsters, men and women who treated prisoners as less than human. The medical experiments were even worse, doctors using prisoners as guinea pigs for horrific procedures without anesthesia, without consent, without any regard for human suffering. Violette somehow survived months in that place. She was assigned to heavy labor, building roads, clearing rubble. Her body, already weakened by torture and the train journey, was breaking down. But she kept going, kept encouraging the other women, kept believing somehow that she'd make it through, that she'd see Tanya again, that she'd go home. But the Nazis had other plans. In January 1945, with the Soviet army approaching, the SS began liquidating prisoners. They were killing anyone they didn't want the Allies to find, anyone who could testify about what had happened in the camps. Violette Szabo, Denise Bloch, and Lillian Rolfe were on that list. 3 British agents who'd been tortured, who'd been sent to a concentration camp, who could tell the world what the Germans had done. The Nazis couldn't let them survive, couldn't let them tell their story. On the evening of January 26th, 1945, an SS officer came for them. He led them out of the camp toward a small building near the crematorium. They knew what was coming. They held hands, the 3 of them. 3 women who'd fought together, suffered together, survived together. They sang the Marseillaise as they walked. Allons, enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé. Arise, children of the fatherland, the day of glory has arrived. A song of freedom, of defiance, one last act of resistance. They were taken inside the building, made to kneel. An SS officer named Johann Schwarzhuber shot each of them in the back of the head, one after another. Violette Szabo was 23 years old. Her daughter was 2.5. She'd been in German custody for 7 months. She'd never broken, never talked, never betrayed anyone, and now she was dead. Her body was cremated. The ashes were scattered. There was no grave, no marker, no way to know where she died. She'd disappeared into the night and fog, just like the Nazis wanted. But here's what the Nazis didn't count on. They didn't count on people remembering. They didn't count on other prisoners surviving and telling the world what had happened. They didn't count on people like us, sitting here decades later, learning her name, learning her story, making sure that what she did means something. When the war ended in May 1945, the SOE tried to find out what had happened to their missing agents. Violette was listed as missing, presumed dead. But they didn't have details. They didn't know when or where she'd died. It took months of investigation, of tracking down survivors from Ravensbrück, of piecing together testimonies from women who'd been there. Slowly, the truth emerged. The torture in Limoges, the imprisonment in Fresnes, the transport to Ravensbrück, the execution in January 1945. All of it slowly coming to light. Her family, her mother, her daughter, they'd been hoping against hope that maybe Violette had survived. Maybe she'd been liberated from some camp and just hadn't made it home yet. When they learned the truth, when they learned that she'd been murdered just months before the war ended, it destroyed them. Her mother never really recovered. She'd lost her son-in-law and her daughter to, this war. And little Tanya, she'd grown up without ever really knowing her mother. She had a few memories, vague impressions of a woman who smiled and laughed and loved her, but mostly she just had stories. Stories about a mother she'd never really known. In December 1946, King George VI awarded Violette Szabo the George Cross posthumously. It's the highest civilian award for gallantry in the United Kingdom, the civilian equivalent of the Victoria Cross. The citation reads, in part, "She volunteered to undertake a particularly dangerous mission in France. Twice parachuting into enemy-occupied territory, she carried out the work she was sent to do. But on her second mission, after a fight with the Gestapo, she was captured. Despite repeated and atrocious torture, she refused to disclose any information concerning her work or her colleagues. Madame Szabo gave a magnificent example of courage and steadfastness. She also received the Croix de Guerre from France, the Médaille de la Resistance and several other honors. Streets were named after her. Memorials were erected. Books were written. A movie, Carve Her Name with Pride, was made in 1958, telling her story. Virginia McKenna played Violette, and the film introduced a whole generation to the story of this remarkable woman. But here's what kills me. Here's what I want you to really think about. All those honors, all those medals, all that recognition, they came after she was dead. When she was alive, when she was fighting, when she was suffering, she was alone. The British government couldn't acknowledge her, couldn't help her, couldn't even admit she existed. If the Germans had offered to exchange her for German prisoners, Britain would have said, "We don't know who you're talking about." That's what Nacht und Nebel meant. She'd been disappeared, erased, and she knew it. She knew that if she was caught, she was on her own, and she volunteered anyway. Think about the courage that takes to know that if things go wrong, nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's going to negotiate for your release. Nobody's going to mount a rescue operation. You're alone, and you're going to die alone, and the people who sent you won't even acknowledge that you existed. And you do it anyway, because it's the right thing to do, because somebody has to, because if not you, then who? You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of every veteran I've ever known who did their duty, even when it was hard, even when it was terrifying, even when they knew they might not come home. It's that same willingness to sacrifice yourself for something bigger than yourself, for freedom, for your country, for the future. Violette understood that. She lived it, and she died for it. I want you to think about something else, too. Violette had a choice. She could have stayed in England, could have kept working at the aircraft factory, doing her bit for the war effort without risking her life. Nobody would have blamed her. She had a daughter to raise. She'd already lost her husband. She had every reason to play it safe, to stay alive, to be there for Tanya. Most people in her situation would have done exactly that. It's the rational choice, the sensible choice. But Violette didn't make the sensible choice. She made the right choice, the hard choice. She understood that if people like her didn't fight, didn't take risks, didn't put their lives on the line, then evil would win. The Nazis would keep murdering, keep enslaving, keep destroying everything good in the world, and she couldn't live with that. She'd rather die fighting than live knowing she could have done more. That's heroism, not the Hollywood version with dramatic music and slow-motion action sequences. Real heroism, the kind where you're scared, where you know you're probably going to die, where every instinct is screaming at you to run away. And you do it anyway. You put one foot in front of the other and you walk into hell because somebody has to, and it might as well be you. And here's the thing that breaks my heart. Tanya grew up without her mother. She had to live with the knowledge that her mother had chosen the mission over staying with her. Now, Violette loved her daughter. There's no question about that. But she loved freedom more. She loved the idea of a world where her daughter could grow up free more than she loved being there to see it. That's a sacrifice I don't know if I could make. I honestly don't. To choose the abstract concept of freedom over the concrete reality of your child, that takes a kind of strength I'm not sure I have. Tanya eventually understood. She grew up proud of her mother, proud of what she'd done. She attended ceremonies, accepted medals on her mother's behalf, told people about the woman who'd given birth to her, and then given everything else for a cause she believed in. But I wonder sometimes how hard that must have been, to be proud and to be angry at the same time, to honor your mother's sacrifice while wishing, somewhere deep down, that she'd just stayed home. Look, if you've made it this far in the video, I want to ask you for something. Not for me, for them. For Violette and all the others who did what she did. Hit that like button. Leave a comment telling me what you think about this story, and subscribe to this channel. I know everyone asks for subscriptions, but here's why it matters. These stories, they're fading. The people who lived through World War II, most of them are gone now. The veterans, the survivors, the witnesses, they're in their 90s if they're still alive at all. Pretty soon, there won't be anyone left who remembers. And if we don't tell these stories, if we don't keep them alive, they'll be forgotten. Violette Szabo will become a footnote in a history book that nobody reads. I don't want that to happen. I don't think you want that to happen either. So subscribe, share this video, make sure that her sacrifice meant something. Make sure that people remember. Because memory is the only immortality most of us get. And heroes like Violette Szabo deserve to be remembered. After the war, the SOE was disbanded. The organization had done its job, and now it was no longer needed. The files were sealed, classified. For decades, most of what the SOE had done remained secret. The agents who survived couldn't talk about their work. National security, they were told. The operations were too sensitive, the methods too revealing. So they stayed silent, these men and women who'd risked everything, and nobody knew what they'd done. It wasn't until the 1990s that the British government finally began to release the SOE files. Slowly, the full story started to come out. The missions, the casualties, the successes and failures, the incredible bravery of people like Violette Szabo, and we learned just how dangerous the work had been. Of the 470 SOE agents sent into France during the war, 118 never came back. That's a death rate of 25%. 1 in 4 didn't survive. For female agents, the numbers were even worse. Of the 39 women sent into France, 13 died. That's a death rate of 33%, 1 in 3. And Violette knew those odds when she volunteered. You know what impresses me most about Violette? It's not the fighting, though that was impressive. It's not even the refusal to break under torture, though that's almost superhuman. It's the fact that she went back. After her first mission, she could have said no to the second one, could have told the SOE, I did my part, send someone else. Nobody would have blamed her. She'd proven herself. She'd earned the right to sit out the rest of the war in safety. But when they asked her to go back, she said yes, without hesitation. She knew it was more dangerous the second time. She knew the Germans were cracking down harder. She knew her chances of survival were even lower than before. And she went anyway. That's not courage. That's something beyond courage. That's a kind of selflessness that most of us can't even comprehend. I think about the men in that SS unit who captured her. I think about what it must have been like to realize that this young woman, this girl barely out of her teens, had held off an entire unit by herself for an hour. I wonder if any of them felt ashamed, if any of them thought, we're supposed to be the master race, the elite soldiers, and this woman fought harder than most of our men would. Probably not. Probably they just felt relief that they'd finally captured her without getting more of their men killed. But I like to think that maybe 1 or 2 of them went home after the war and remembered that day and understood that courage isn't about what flag you fight under or what uniform you wear. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice for what you believe in. The Gestapo officers who tortured her, I hope they couldn't sleep at night. I hope the memory of what they did to her haunted them for the rest of their lives. I hope they remembered the woman who wouldn't break, the woman who was stronger than they were despite all their power and cruelty, and I hope it destroyed them, because they deserved to be destroyed by that memory. They deserved to carry that weight until the day they died. After the war, there was a war crimes trial. Johann Schwarzhuber, the SS officer who killed Violette, Denise, and Lillian, was captured. He was tried at the Ravensbrück trial in Hamburg in 1947. He was found guilty of war crimes and executed. Not much of a price to pay for murdering 3 brave women. Not much justice at all, really. But at least he didn't get to walk away. At least he faced some kind of consequence for what he'd done. They tried to find Violette's body. After the war, investigators went to Ravensbrück, trying to locate the remains of the executed agents, but there was nothing to find. She'd been cremated. The ashes had been scattered or buried in mass graves. There was no way to identify her remains, no way to bring her home. She's still there, somewhere in Germany, mixed with the soil and the ashes of thousands of other victims. No grave, no headstone, just memory. There's a memorial to her at Ravensbrück now, a plaque with her name on it, along with the names of the other SOE agents who died there. It's something. Not much, but something. A way of saying, this is where she died. This is where she made her last stand. Remember her. In England there are several memorials. There's a plaque at the house where she lived in Brixton. There's a bust of her at the Violette Szabo Museum in Warmelo, Herefordshire. There's a memorial to all the SOE agents at Valenciennes in France, with Violette's name inscribed on it. These markers, these monuments, they're important. They're the world's way of saying, we remember, we honor your sacrifice. Your death meant something. But the real memorial is the world she helped create. The free world. The world where democracy survived, where fascism was defeated, where people can live without fear of midnight knocks on the door and cattle cars to concentration camps. She died for that world. She tortured and bled and suffered for it. And we're living in it right now, thanks to her and thousands like her who gave everything for a future they'd never see. Tanya, Violette's daughter, lived until 2020. She died at the age of 78, having spent her entire life as the daughter of a hero. She never forgot her mother. Couldn't forget, even though she barely remembered her. The memory of Violette Szabo was too powerful, too present. Everywhere Tanya went, people wanted to talk about her mother, to ask questions, to share their own stories about the war. It must have been exhausting sometimes, to always be Violette Szabo's daughter instead of just Tanya. But she carried that burden with grace. She understood that she was the living link to her mother's legacy, the proof that Violette's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. After all, Violette had died so that Tanya could live free. And Tanya did live free for 78 years in a world that her mother had helped save. You know what gets me? What really tears me up inside? It's thinking about that moment in Friends' prison or in Ravensbrück when Violette was alone in her cell and thought about Tanya. Did she regret it? Did she ever wish she'd stayed home, stayed safe, been there to raise her daughter? I think she must have. She was human. She loved her child. Of course, she must have had moments of doubt, moments where the pain was too much, and she wondered if it had been worth it. But she never acted on those doubts, never tried to bargain her way out by giving up information. She made a choice, and she stuck to it, even when it cost her everything. That's integrity. That's honor. That's what we mean when we talk about duty. The SOE trained thousands of agents during the war. Most of them came home, but the ones who didn't, the ones like Violette who died in German prisons and concentration camps, they haunt me. Because they died alone, they died in pain. They died knowing that they'd never see their families again, never go home, never live to see the victory they'd fought for. And they didn't get to die heroically in battle, didn't go down fighting with guns blazing. They were murdered, executed, killed like animals after being tortured and broken physically, if not mentally. There's nothing glorious about it, nothing Hollywood about it. It's just horrible and sad and wrong. But they did it anyway. Knowing all of that, they volunteered. They put on civilian clothes, picked up their false papers, got on those planes, and jumped into occupied Europe. They knew what could happen. They'd been told explicitly. You might be captured, you might be tortured, you might be killed, and if you are, we'll deny we ever knew you. And they said yes. Yes, I'll go. Yes, I'll take that risk. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes, because somebody has to. That's the lesson of Violette Szabo's life. Not that war is glorious, not that violence is the answer, but that sometimes, when evil is on the march, good people have to stand up and fight, even if they're scared, even if they might lose, even if it costs them everything, because if they don't, then evil wins. And a world where evil wins isn't worth living in. Violette Szabo was 23 years old when she died. Think about what you were doing at 23. I know what I was doing. I was trying to figure out my life, making mistakes, learning how to be an adult. I wasn't thinking about sacrifice or duty or saving the world. I was just trying to get by, same as most people. But Violette, at 23, had already lived a lifetime. She'd been married, widowed, become a mother, joined a secret organization, parachuted behind enemy lines twice, killed enemy soldiers, held off an SS unit single-handedly, been tortured for months, and finally been executed in a concentration camp. All before her 24th birthday. She lived more in 23 years than most of us live in 80, and she's not famous. Oh, people who study World War II know her name. People in Britain who pay attention to history know her story. But most people have never heard of Violette Szabo. They know about Patton and Eisenhower and Churchill. They know about D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge. But they don't know about the young mother who fought and died in the shadows, who gave everything for a cause that most people would never even know she'd served. That's what bothers me. That heroism like hers goes unrecognized, unrewarded, forgotten. She deserves better. They all do, all the secret warriors who died in obscurity. If you've stuck with me this far, we're coming to the end of this story, and I want to ask you one more time, and I promise this is the last time. If this story moved you, if you think it's important that people know about Violette Szabo, subscribe to this channel. Tell your friends about this video. Share it. Leave a comment. Let me know that telling these stories matters, because here's the truth. I can't make people care. I can tell you the facts, I can lay out what happened, but I can't make you feel anything. That's up to you. You have to decide whether stories like this matter, whether the sacrifice of people like Violette Szabo deserves to be remembered. I think it does. I think we owe it to them to remember, to honor, to make sure that what they did isn't forgotten. But you have to decide that for yourself. So if you agree, show me. Hit that button. And let's make sure that Violette Szabo's name lives on. In 2015, 70 years after the war ended, the British government announced that it would pardon all of the SOE agents who had been executed by the Germans. Now, that might sound strange. Pardon them for what? They didn't do anything wrong. But under military law at the time, agents who were captured were considered to have failed in their duty. It was an old law, an unfair law, a law that made no sense when applied to people who'd been tortured and murdered, but it was on the books. And finally, in 2015, the British government officially acknowledged that these agents had done nothing wrong, that they'd been heroes, not failures, that they deserved honor, not shame. It was too late for Violette, too late for all of them. But maybe it meant something to their families. Maybe it meant something to know that their country finally, officially, recognized what they'd done. I'd like to think it did. There's a poem that was written about the SOE agents, those who didn't come back. It's called Pro Patria, which is Latin for country. I'm going to read you the last verse because I think it captures something important about people like Violette. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. It's from a longer poem by Lawrence Binyon, written during World War I, but it applies just as well to World War II and to Violette Szabo. She didn't grow old. She never got to see her hair turn gray, never got to watch her daughter grow up, never got to hold her grandchildren. She's forever 23, forever young, forever at the moment of her greatest courage and her greatest sacrifice. We grew old. We got to live our lives, raise our families, grow comfortable and safe. She died so we could do that. The least we can do is remember her name. There's a question that always comes up when we talk about people like Violette. The question is, would you do it? If you were in her situation, if your country asked you to volunteer for a mission where you'd probably die, where you'd be tortured if you were caught, where success meant sacrificing everything, would you say yes? Most people, if they're honest, would say no. They'd say, I'd want to, but I don't think I could. I'm not that brave. And that's okay. Most of us aren't that brave. Most of us will never be tested the way Violette was tested. We'll never have to make that choice between safety and duty, between our lives and our principles. But I think it's important to ask ourselves that question, to really think about it. Because the world still needs people like Violette Szabo. Maybe not secret agents parachuting behind enemy lines. That war is over. But the need for courage, for sacrifice, for people who will stand up and fight when it would be easier to look away, that need never goes away. In every generation, in every time and place, there comes a moment when ordinary people have to decide, do I do what's easy or do I do what's right? Do I play it safe or do I take a stand? Violette chose to take a stand. She chose right over easy, duty over safety, sacrifice over comfort, and she paid the ultimate price for that choice. I don't know what cause would make me willing to die. I don't know if I have that in me. But I know that I admire the hell out of people who do. People like Violette Szabo, who look at an impossible situation and say, I'll do it, I'll go, send me. We need people like that. We've always needed them, and we always will. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. It's not that war is good, or that violence solves problems, or that we should all be looking for opportunities to die heroically. It's simpler than that. It's this. When the time comes, when you're faced with a choice between what's easy and what's right, I hope you'll think of Violette Szabo. I hope you'll remember the young mother who kissed her baby goodbye and walked into hell because somebody had to. I hope you'll remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being terrified and doing it anyway. It's knowing you might fail, you might die, you might lose everything, and choosing to try anyway because the alternative is to give up and let evil win. Violette Szabo was a regular person. She wasn't a superhero. She didn't have special training from birth. She wasn't some warrior princess from a movie. She was a department store clerk from Brixton who fell in love, had a baby, and then decided to fight back when the world went crazy. She was one of us, and if she could find that kind of courage inside herself, maybe we can too. When our moment comes, when we're tested, maybe we can reach down and find that same strength, that same refusal to give up, that same determination to do what's right no matter what it costs. That's her legacy. Not the medals, not the memorials, not even the story. Her legacy is the example she set, the proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to, that we're all capable of more than we think we are, that inside every one of us there's a hero waiting for the moment when they're needed. Most of us will never find out if our hero is in there. We'll never be tested that way, and that's okay. We should be grateful for that. But for those who are tested, for those who have to make that choice, I hope they'll remember people like Violette Szabo. I hope they'll know that they're not alone, that others have stood where they're standing and found the courage to do what needed to be done. Violette Szabo died on January 26, 1945. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. She came so close, 3.5 months. If the Germans had held off just a little longer on executing her, if they'd been a little less efficient, a little more disorganized, she might have been liberated. She might have come home. She might have lived to hold her daughter again, to see the victory she'd fought for, to grow old in the free world she'd helped create. But she didn't get that. She died in the darkness, believing that her sacrifice mattered, hoping that it would make a difference, never knowing for certain if it did. But it did matter. It made all the difference in the world. Every agent like her who fought and died disrupted the Nazi war machine. Every bridge they blew up, every German soldier they killed, every piece of intelligence they gathered, it all added up. It slowed the Germans down. It helped the Allies win. The invasion of Normandy succeeded in part because the French resistance, supported by agents like Violette, cut German communications and delayed reinforcements. The Allied advance across France was faster than it should have been because resistance fighters sabotaged German supply lines. The war ended sooner because of people like her. How many Allied soldiers came home alive because Violette Szabo and others like her did their jobs? Thousands? Tens of thousands? We'll never know the exact number. But we know it was significant. We know that what she did saved lives, shortened the war, helped defeat evil, and in the end, that's all she wanted. To make a difference, to fight back, to ensure that her husband's death and her own sacrifice meant something. So when you think about Violette Szabo, don't think about the torture. Don't think about the suffering. Don't think about how she died. Think about how she lived. Think about the courage she showed, the strength she had, the love that drove her to risk everything. Think about the little girl she left behind, who grew up free because her mother fought for freedom. Think about the world we're living in, the world where democracy survived and fascism was defeated. And remember that we're here in part because of people like her. People who gave everything so that we could have something. And remember her name, Violette Szabo. Say it out loud. Let it mean something. Let it remind you that heroes are real, that courage exists, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to. In a world that often seems dark, where evil sometimes seems to be winning, remember that there have always been people like Violette who stood up and fought back. And there always will be. In every generation, in every time and place, there are people who refuse to give in, refuse to give up, refuse to let evil have the last word. Violette Szabo was one of them, and her story, her sacrifice, her courage, they live on. They live on in us, in the stories we tell, in the memories we keep, in the choices we make when our own moment comes. She was 23 years old. She had a baby at home. And she survived Nazi torture that broke trained soldiers. She never talked, never betrayed anyone, never gave up, and in the end, they had to murder her because they couldn't break her. That's strength, that's courage, that's heroism, and that's why we remember. That's why we tell her story. That's why it matters, because people like Violette Szabo remind us what we're capable of. They remind us that inside each of us there's more strength than we know, more courage than we think we have, more capacity for sacrifice and love and duty than we've ever been tested for. And when the time comes, when we're called upon to stand up for what's right, to fight for what we believe in, to sacrifice for something bigger than ourselves, we'll remember her. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find that same courage inside ourselves. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for remembering. Violette Szabo, say her name, remember her story, and make sure that what she did was not in vain.